echo that. We have a look in the past. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott were the first founders in the 1800s. While they were in a honeymoon to attend a world's anti-slavery convention, Stanton met the abolitionist Lucretia Mott, who liked her, who was also angry about the exclusion of women at the proceedings. And Mott and Stanton quickly became friends. When they returned home 80 years later in 1848, Stanton and Mott held the first women's rights convention at Seneca Falls. They organized the Seneca Fall Convention, attended by hundreds of people. Her devotion to women's rights did not deter her for an end to slavery. She and her husband protested the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 helped an enslaved person escape bondage, and years later in 1866, Mott became the first president of the American Equal Rights Association, which paved the way for Betty Friedan in the second wave of the feminist movement in 1966 with her book, The Feminine Mystique. The Feminine Mystique sparked a generation of women and stay-at-home moms to fight to be seen as individual people. They wanted rights to vote. They wanted to buy homes. They wanted pensions. They wanted to work outside of the home. Betty Friedan was the Proverbs 31 woman of her time, which invited many women to fight for their own freedom. Everything was great until all the outside agendas and propaganda came in. And hear this.
Well, one of the things they told me was that he was at the house one night, and we were talking, and he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about?" And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote, you know? And he started to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, "Let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded Women's Lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation." He says, "And you want to know why?" He said, "There were two primary reasons. And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before Women's Lib. And the second reason was, now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. It breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them." And so those are the two primary reasons for Women's Lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. You know, when I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble adventure.
So then forth, the movement was infiltrated by the CIA/elites. And Gloria Steinem worked with the CIA as an agent to infiltrate the feminist movement. She was an agent, and this is her confession right here.
Yes, when the story broke that I have for 4 years been a Central Intelligence agent, I was demonstrating outside the Pentagon underneath Mr. McNamara's office against bombing in Vietnam. And this didn't precisely fit with the image of a CIA agent, but then neither does the CIA.
There you go. You heard it there. She literally admitted to being a CIA agent or a Central Intelligence agent. And it's the same CIA that conducted mind control experiments on unwilling participants. So MK Ultra was a top secret CIA project, which the agency conducted hundreds of experiments, sometimes on unwitting citizens, to assess the potential use of LSD and other drugs for mind control, information gathering, and psychological torture. Though Project MK Ultra lasted from 1957 until about 1973, and detailed of the elected program didn't become public until 1975. The CIA was funding Gloria, and just look at this image right here on the right, and then obviously the MK Ultra Trinity dance in London as well, which is very similar. So we know that it was for sure infiltrated by the CIA. And this was one of the biggest magazines written by Gloria in the 70s, backed up fully by the CIA to infiltrate propagandas in there. And it just had so much chauvinistic comments about men and just degrading men. And I also believe that Gloria was under sex kitten beta programming, which is a form of MK Ultra. I mean, as you can see here, just looking into her eyes, they just always look a little blank. And also like the fact that like she's usually seen with cats. I'm like, maybe she just really likes cats, but just makes me a little bit more suspicious as well. It's because Gloria had gone undercover as a play bunny in New York to infiltrate and get their secrets, and she went by the name Maria Catherine Uch. And the second reason why I suspect this might have been the case is because the CIA had an operation called Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax was a MK Ultra project in which the government employed prostitutes and lured on suspecting men to CIA safe houses where drug experiments took place. And the CIA dosed men with LSD, and then while at times drinking cocktails behind a two-way mirror, watching the drug effects on men's behavior. Recording devices were installed in the prostitute's room disguised as electrical outlet, and most of the Operation Midnight Climax experiments took place in San Francisco, California, and in New York. And at the time, Gloria, when she went undercover, she was in New York doing this as a undercover play bunny. So it's all sort of like making sense. And once again, look at her eyes. They just look just so blank, like she's under some form of control. And just a quick side note connection, Jay-Z and Rock Nation / the Rockefellers, who pushed the feminist movement to the mainstream for their own elitist agendas of control and population control. So there's Gloria right there doing the little pyramid, and then Jay-Z, who is also a elitist and a Satanist as well. MK Ultra / Monarch control is still kicking till this day. These are just some of the celebrities right now. We've got Beyonce, SZA, Harry Styles, obviously Billie Eilish, Ariana Grande, and so the monarch butterfly is used by those within the music industry to symbolize the trauma-based control techniques being carried out predominantly on female celebrities performing puppets. We see relentless parades in front of the idolizing masses. The monarch. This symbol is very common in the entertainment industry. There are so many celebrities under this form of, and the list just goes on and on and on in Hollywood. But the thing is, Betty knew. So there was always tension between her and Gloria. And in this particular article here, it says, in one particular distracting proximity battle, which has yet to feature on Miss America, Betty Friedan joined the Red Stocking, a New York feminist group, insinuating Steinem was a CIA operative dispatched to infiltrate the movement and incite divisiveness. Steinem returned to the friendly pages off our backs to defend herself, despite misgiving our encouraging established newspaper. The war again to infiltrate goes on, and that's why there was always tension between Betty and Gloria in the feminist movement. And the sexual revolution and the feminist movements were two separate movements. But due to infiltration and more propaganda, they became one, unfortunately. Two infamous men that changed everything: Larry Ladder and Bernard Nathanson. Larry was a friend of Margaret Sanger of the now Planned Parenthood. Margaret was a racist and a huge eugenicist. So they all believed in population control because she was in with the elites. Margaret was about prevention and not abortion. She believed it was an evil act, hence the birth control pills. And this is what she says in one of her articles. She says, "Mother, can you afford to have a large family? Do you want any children? If not, why do you have them? Do not kill, do not take life, but prevent. Safe, harmless information can be obtained of trained nurses." Betty Friedan and the majority of the feminist movement believed it was an evil act and murder as well. So before they passed the Bill of Rights, after years of convincing Friedan to put abortion in the movement, and out of fear of the bill not being passed, told the press that every woman wanted legalized abortion, all to a means to an end because they did not want to lose their job. Larry was very much so against church and sexual morality. And then this is what he says in one of the articles. He expressed the belief that legalizing abortion struck at the whole system of sexual morality, to which the middle class gives lip service. He maintained that to tamper with abortion meant the whole system of sexual morality would come tumbling down. Wow. So his inspirations came from a man named Alfred Kingsley. Who was Alfred Kingsley? So he was a sex researcher, professor, and most importantly, a Satanist at Indiana University in 1947. And that's him right there. And he followed Aleister Crowley's teaching. So people considered Kingsley as a pedophile, adulterer, attention seeker, pornographic film maker, and an addict whose sole objective in carrying out research on sexology was to normalize and to legitimize his many illegal fetishes, children from birth having orgasms, and incest benefits. Yeah, this man was definitely into a lot of pedophilic, satanic ways, and he learned that from Aleister Crowley. He was a heavy Satanist. I mean, like, he was known as the wickedest man alive. The Beast 666. Aleister Crowley believed in killing young babies and drinking their blood for immortality. He ate feces with his cult, and people would often die from it. He also raped and abused children. Aleister Crowley, in his book, The Book of the Law, he says, "Do what thy wilt shall be the whole of the law." So this is how the book came to be. On March 16, 1904, while Crowley and Rose were performing a ritual, the Stauffs Rose seemed to enter into a light trance and repeatedly said, "They're waiting for you." And Crowley began to listen to Rose. After talking her to the Bochum Museum, there he asked her to point out Horus to him, and she passed several common images of the god and led away the wooden paintings. But as we skip here, it says Crowley was impressed by the fact that the museum numbered this piece 666. This was the number he had imagined with since childhood. At Rose's direction, Crowley entered his room on 3 successful days beginning April 8th, 1904, and wrote down what he heard, dictated by a shadowy presence behind him. The result was 3 chapters of the verse known as the Book of the Law. And a Stauff is a air spirit. This is what the Bible says. In Ephesians, it says, "And you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, and following the prince of power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in sons of disobedience. The Bible says that Satan, the God of this world, has blinded those who do not believe. They are unable to see the gloriousness of light of the good news. They do not understand this message about the glory of Christ, who is exact likeness of God. Man. But his last words were, I am perplexed. Satan, get out. And he died. Because he realized that he was being deceived by the devil, by the enemy, by the prince of the air, Satan, who has deceived the whole world and blinded the whole world, man. And his followers today are unfortunately those in Hollywood. We have Robert Downey, we have Jay-Z, we have the Beatles, in Sgt. Pepper, we have Nirvana, Lady Gaga, and the list just goes on and on and on of the people in Hollywood, man. And then we have more propaganda right here, more liberation, Sex and the Single Girls, written by Helen Gurley Brown, ex-chief editor of Cosmopolitan. Here we go.
I wrote it to help the unmarried women in this country to stop being ashamed of sex or being single. And I want them to stop behaving like mice and start behaving like men.
And start behaving like men. Just taking the fact that men and women are different, both physically and psychologically. And they're just trying to essentially just create men because, of earlier, like they said, they wanted to tax the other half of the population, which is women, and they wanted women out the homes so that they could indoctrinate the children at schools for longer. Because if the women and men were both at work, then guess who's the family? The schools, the state, the government. They can control generations to come. So Cosmo was essentially selling women a dream, and here's why.
That night, when he took me home, I said, David, bye-bye. I love you, and I'm going to miss you, but I don't want to hear from you unless you ask me to get married.
I sent out St. Bernards with flasks of brandy. No, Helen. I finally tracked her down and said in that most romantic of expressions, I surrender, dear.
It's a great aphrodisiac when a woman is smart.
Mention sex and the single girl is
I'm a working girl in an advertising agency. I came home to my new husband one night and I said, David, I'm going to be fired. Could you think of a book I could write? You've helped other people write books. He said, why don't you write about being single? He said, you were like no other single woman I ever met. You were never home. I said, David, I was home. I had the phone in the refrigerator, so I couldn't hear it ring. If I heard it ring, I would have answered it, and you know I'm not the belle of the ball. I'm home alone on Saturday night. He said, well, write about that.
I suggested that she write a book about her life.
So yeah, she said that they could be happy single while yet she was married with a whole husband, promoting the single life. That's anyway. So yeah, she was essentially promoting singleness and being promiscuous and just going against the feminist movement, which is all about seeing women as a full entity, not just as sex objects, which she essentially commodified women. And Betty Friedan was just like, this magazine is disgusting because it has nothing to do with true freedom, which is why this magazine was heavily promoted, and it's still one of the biggest magazines in history. And there we go with the decline of women's happiness over the decades continues to go down, because we have these propaganda shows, and then a modern version of this would be Sex and the City. As we look at the graph right here, ever since the 70s, it's been declining more and more, and it really took a huge dip in the 2000s. More women are unhappier than ever. They're more depressed. They're more suicidal, and there's so many factors, of course, but I can assure you that the sexual liberation movement did not make women happier, because that was never their original intentions for the movement. Men and women are equal in terms of human value and rights, but we do have biological and physical differences. And modern day radical feminists oftentimes sweep that under the rug for empowerment. Slogans like "the future is female," "men are trash," "I am a independent woman and I don't need a man." But when we look at history, you can see the original feminists understood that it was teamwork with their husbands slash the opposite sex and not being a chauvinist. It just turned into how much of a man can I be instead of asking each other, how can I be a better partner or ally? Because through history, it's been a beautiful, not perfect partnership, but a willingness to cooperate with each other was what kept the human race going. And single motherhood increased over time, especially in African American households, due to the incentivization of welfare and not having fathers present in the home. And as we can see, it just skyrocketed among the African American community. But it's honestly affecting every single race. Every single race is being affected by this because of the whole sexual revolution merging and becoming one with the feminist movement. Has hookup culture made women any happier? Well, it says the majority of women reported to being dissatisfied with non-committal hookups, preferring instead some kind of emotional support and commitment from the guy they are physically intimate with. Despite diverse initial perception and experience with hookup culture, 100% of female interviewees stated a clear preference for committed relationship, and 74% of female surveys respondents say that ideally they would like to be in a committed relationship with one person. Now, including her own experience, it is not a betrayal of feminism to acknowledge that women want different things than men from sexual encounters. She writes in conclusion, "It is time we start admitting hookup culture is a game many of us either play willingly or through social pressure, in which it physically pains me to say this, and presently holds and perhaps have held power." Ouch. And this is a story from a ex-Playboy writer. She says, "It's a tough needle to a thread. I'm grateful for the ability to control my reproductive cycle and to make my own money, but the freedom has come at a price. And the dark side of the sexual revolution is that even though it liberated women on yoking, sex from the consequences has primarily benefited men." I was first inspired to write this piece when I was 19. I used to wait tables with me ask Bridget, "Have you ever regretted having sex with a man?" I laughed all the time. That's not entirely true. And there was my first love in high school and my first husband. But if I'm honest with myself, dozens of men I've slept with, at least one I remember. I can only think of a handful I do not regret. The rest I would put in the category of casual sex. I would define as sex that is either meaningless or mediocre or both. If I get really honest, I'd say of these usual drunken encounters left me feeling empty and demoralized and worthless. And I wouldn't have said that at the time. I would have told you I'm liberated, even though I tried to drink away the sick feeling of rejection. When my most recent hookup did not call me back. At the time, I would have said one night stand made me feel emboldened. In reality, I was using sex like a drug, trying to unsuccessfully fill a void inside me with men. And men, she says, pun intended. Something like that. All right. I know regretting most of my sexual encounters is not something a sex positive feminist who used to write a column for is supposed to admit. She says, "I lost my virginity at a restaurant when I worked. A year later, I experienced my first sexual assault. I felt damaged and dirty, and I blamed myself, and everyone responds differently. And I dealt with mine with the overwhelming shame by becoming hypersexual and promiscuous. And the culture was right there to pick me up and dust off and I doubled down on being a proud slut and internalized the most damaging lie that loveless sex is empowering. And I bask in girl power, and the glow of that delusion for weaponizing my sexuality while convincing myself I was full of divine feminine. I was full of dude. I told myself that I could seduce a man. I was powerful. As Perry says in her book, women can all too easily fail to recognize that being desired is not the same thing as being held in high esteem. Amen. Just because a man has sex with you doesn't mean he respects you. But deep down, I knew that had to be the case. But as a defense mechanism, I crafted a man-eating persona. My mantra were rigid. You can either have a career, a relationship, but you can't have both. Intimacy is creepy. Motherhood and children are a trap, and sex is only about power. And another set of lies built on trauma. Sex isn't just about power, it's also about intimacy. It's also about vulnerability and trust. Things I wanted nothing to do with, because implicit in modern dating is a complete lack of. But the truth is, men and women are both suffering from hookup culture, unfortunately. And I don't know about you, but I want to be in tears of joy seeing my forever partner walking down the aisle instead of crying because somebody ghosted you from a one night stand. And I just want to end this with this beautiful passage in Ephesians. This, talks about wives submitting onto their husbands, which is so beautiful. But also, the most beautiful thing is if we go down at 25 right here, it says, husbands, love your wives, seek the highest for her, surrender her with a caring, unselfish love, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. And if you know anything about Christ, he was literally beaten senseless and died while we were still in our own sin and wickedness and bitterness and greed. And he came, and on that cross, he said, forgive them, for they do not know what they have done. And I just want to end this. The God of this world has blinded those who do not believe. And it's so sad. And I was there once, and I was lost, and I was hurt, and I was empty, just having sex with all these random people. But I found God. He saved me from everything. And I'm so grateful. And I just want to urge you to seek a relationship with God. There is no coming back. You die once, and then the judgment. God bless.